Any of you who didn't get to be introduced to David earlier, because David was out of town last week on vacation with his family, but David is our, what's your title? You got a title or something? You're like...
Masterwork?
So, yeah.
Just a music teacher.
Music teacher.
Yeah, just music teacher.
And then David's also kind of working on sort of bringing a sort of cohesion to the biblical, theological part of what's going on at Masterwork so that kids are getting the same, reinforcing the same biblical themes in all of the art disciplines. So, so David, you're going to tell us a little bit more about your story, so I'm going to tell too much. But anyways, so I'm really grateful that we were able to increase the scope of David's work, also to just ride with me a little bit on some of this kind of like regenerative agriculture for Jesus stuff. So it's been a lot of fun to have somebody to kick some of these things around with. So I'm super excited for you to be here. And why don't you just go around the room and say our names, because there's just a couple faces we haven't seen before. So yeah, I'll do it. I'll do it.
Start with me.
Yeah, go ahead.
Elsie. Hall.
Paul Desmond.
Doug Smith.
Katie Evans.
Brandon Evans.
Ryan Grayler.
Rita Grayler. Jackie Allison. Barbara Muggy.
Whitney, I knew you looked familiar when I saw you at Masterwork the other day.
Oh, yeah.
I was like, oh, I know him, but
I think I did the same thing.
you were going on last week.
And Dan McDonald.
Awesome.
And I'm James. I work here.
David Lepine. Where'd it go?
Oh no, I did that again.
I got it. I think. What is this?
Yeah. I've done it 7 times, so it's kind of like in the zone now.
Yeah, there's like a real special touch you gotta have. Nice. This is not part of my presentation, and I actually, the price has popped up. This was my background on my computer at one point when I was working for a chicken company.
That's really nice.
But it's not my background now, so I don't know why this is showing up.
It's still there somewhere.
My background now is a regular Apple background, but for some reason, it still thinks I've got the chicken background.
It knew you were going to this class.
I guess so. I guess so. Those actually, they're not technically chicken. I think this is jungle fowl, so this is the ancestral predecessor of chickens. Yeah, so
They're gorgeous.
the modern chicken that we know and love originated in the jungles of Indonesia as the jungle fowl.
Yes.
Well, shall I begin?
Please.
Okay.
Can you kick us off some prayer?
Me? Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'll pray for you.
Oh.
Heavenly Father, we thank you for this time to come together and study your word and fellowship. I pray that you would bless our time, give us fruitful discussion, and enliven our imagination for your kingdom. We love you, and we pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Okay, so the plan for me for tonight, I'm going to share a little bit about my story. Just where I have been over the last 10 years or so in ag, and I have a lot of pictures, so that should be fun. Feel free to jump in at any time if you have questions. Happy for this to be conversational. And then after I've kind of given the broad overview of where I've been, I'd like to zero in a little bit about more the personal, spiritual, intellectual journey that I've had simultaneously with my ag journey, just processing through some of these issues and coming to terms for myself with this big question of faith and the environment, faith and agriculture. So that's the plan. We will dive in with where this all started for me, which I have affectionately termed my crunchy high schooler phase. So I got interested in all these issues as a high schooler, and I was able to find this. What?
Is that Ray Bakke?
This is I wrote this persuasive essay for my 12th grade English class why you should stop using shampoo. Okay, so this is kind of where it all began for me. I stopped using shampoo, started washing my hair with baking soda and apple cider vinegar, and then I stopped using deodorant and started making my own deodorant with baking soda and coconut oil. And then I read this book called Born to Run that convinced me I needed to ditch my shoes and start running barefoot. It wasn't just the book. I had been a cross-country runner and gotten shin splints so bad that it turned into a stress fracture. And so that was part of the journey too for me, was just knowing my own body. And so I was doing the barefoot running thing. I was making my own body care products, and somewhere along this path, I, got introduced to the paleo diet. So if you remember about 10 years ago, that was kind of the big thing, was the paleo diet. Now people talk more about the carnivore diet, I think is the new thing. But the blogs I was reading at the time would talk about the paleo diet, which is basically, if you're not familiar, it's the idea that we're supposed to eat like hunter-gatherers, and that's how our bodies are designed to eat. So stay away from grains, stay away from any kind of agricultural products, only eat meat and like berries and stuff is kind of the idea of the paleo diet. And when you read about the paleo diet, you start getting introduced to concepts like grass-fed beef and organic produce, and kind of why some of those terms matter and what they mean. And so my senior year of high school, I read this book. Has anybody else read this book, familiar with this book? This was very big at that time. Michael Pollan is a journalist who writes a lot about food and farming. This is probably his biggest book, The Omnivore's Dilemma. Really interesting book. I don't recall a ton about it, but what really stood out to me was the profile that he does in that book of this guy who we've talked about already, Joel Salatin, a farmer in Virginia. His farm is called Polyface Farm, and there's an extended section in this book where Pollan kind of describes his farming practices. He talks about this like beautiful cyclic rotation that Joel guides his farm through, where the cattle will come through the pasture and knock down the big grass, and then he'll lead the chickens through to scratch through the cow manure and to eat the bugs, and then the pigs come through or whatever. The details aren't what I remember, but I remember being really impressed by this beautiful picture of this farm and its cycles and how it worked. And so I decided I needed to go work on a farm, and I did that the summer after my freshman year of college. Came to Tulsa, went to the University of Tulsa. And my sister said, hey, why don't you come out to Indiana, where she was living at the time with her family. And they were members in their small town in Indiana of a CSA. So I think we talked about that maybe a couple weeks ago. CSA is a community supported agriculture is what it stands for. And basically the idea is you pay the farmers up front at the beginning of the season, and they will give you weekly shares of whatever is in season throughout the course of that growing season. And so my my sister and her family lived in this small town. They were members of this CSA. They said, come stay with us for the summer. You can work on this farm. You've been wanting to learn more about this thing. So I did, and took a selfie with a pig, and got my hands dirty, picking some squash, and read this book. There's going to be a lot of books in this presentation because I kind of track my journey through the books I've been reading. So I sometimes think, if I had only read The Omnivore's Dilemma, I think I would have been interested, amused, I don't know. But if I hadn't read Wendell Berry, The Unsettling of America, this is really the book that changed my course because Wendell Berry does a great job of describing how our ecological crisis is at root a cultural and moral crisis. And so he kind of gets to the big picture, gets to the heart of the matter in a way that was really appealing to me, especially, I was a philosophy major and an English major. And so he was just he was hitting me right where I needed to be hit. So that was my first summer working there, reading this book, and I continued on after that. finished my degree, spent all my summers working on farms. So I was getting a liberal arts degree, but I had this growing interest and passion in what we called back then sustainable agriculture. I think now they tend to talk about regenerative agriculture. But so
Do you know Joe came to church with us for a while?
Joe from
Joe's farm.
really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, he was here with us like kind of pre-pandemic, and then had somewhere during the pandemic. He
Yeah.
kind of drifted off.
Bummer. Yeah, I worked at Joe's farm back when it was called Progressive Farm before he had changed the name. It's not a good name, so I'm glad he changed it. But, yeah, got a wide range of experience over the next few years. Urban farm to Joe's farm. If you're not familiar with Joe's farm, this is a really sweet property in Bixby. He's got 17 acres, and he bought it back in the 90s, and so these housing developments have just like sprung up around him, and like all these young families are living in these suburbs around him and want to buy his food, and he's certified organic, and he's gotten into fruit production, so he's doing blackberries and strawberries and as well as all these beautiful vegetables, and it's this just nice Arkansas River sandy loam soil. So it's a really cool farm, and I loved working there.
I have a question.
Yes.
Which one was local farm in Glenville?
Yeah, the name of the company was Local Farm OK, and it was more than a farm. Were you the one who was interested in hydroponics?
Yeah, I got some invites.
Yeah, so it was a hydroponic farm, but it was also a delivery service, and so they had, I want to say 3 tunnels, and they were doing lettuce and greens, and they would deliver it to homes with an assortment of other produce that they were supposedly sourcing from other local farms. That was not entirely genuine, but that was the idea, and they tried to do it as often as they could. But yeah, that was the business there. So Glenpool, yeah, he had 3 hydroponic tunnels. And then after I stopped working for him, he started growing marijuana because they legalized it in Oklahoma. So I think he's still doing some lettuce, but I'm not really sure.
The devil's lettuce.
The devil's lettuce, that's right, exactly. Yeah. So Little Rock Urban Farming, Joe's farm, hydroponic farm, had a brief fun project with another guy that we're gonna hear from in this class, Nathan Picard, at Emerson Elementary. If you're familiar with Emerson, they were transitioning to be a Montessori school, and as part of that transformation, they wanted to add agricultural elements to their property. And so I worked with Nathan for a couple months on getting that garden started. I think it wasn't quite half an acre, maybe it was a quarter acre of vegetable production that we were doing out there. Worked for the city of Tulsa briefly, Parks and Recreation, and then got to work for a cool startup project in Bentonville, Arkansas called Red Barn, which if you've ever heard the term agri-hood, that's what they were trying to be. So I don't know who came up with this, but somebody thought it would be a good idea to, in the same way that you might build a neighborhood that's centered around a golf course, why not build a neighborhood that's centered around a working farm? So that was the idea. It was the first one that they've done in Arkansas, I believe. And they had about an acre of vegetable production, and then they started doing chickens about the time I was leaving, just laying hens, and had a little on-site farm stand where residents could shop, and there were volunteer opportunities if they wanted to get their hands dirty with what was going on. So kind of a cool model.
Did the neighborhood then theoretically support a farmer?
Say again.
Did the neighborhood theoretically support a farmer then? Who's responsible for the...
That was the idea. Yeah, that was the idea. I know they've cycled through a couple different people in that role.
Yeah.
In the meantime. So I don't.
Did any of these make money?
Yeah. That's an interesting question. Yeah. I don't know because I wasn't privy to that. Because this was mainly kind of internships and low man on the totem pole positions that I was doing. I bet the weed guy made some money.
Yeah.
Hopefully in the boom before everything burst. But Yeah, I think, any other questions on this?
What is a profitable crop?
It is, yeah. So, I was all over the place for a good 4 or 5 years. This was like all I was thinking
This
about.
would have been after university.
Yes, this was during summer,
Okay.
but everything else was after
What do you do
graduation.
now?
What's that?
What do you do now?
Well, I'll get to that.
Okay.
There's a lot more story. So then we moved out to Grove and started our farm, which we call Thorntree Farm.
Can I turn the light up, is that okay?
Yeah, of course. Here, I got you.
Okay.
Is that easier?
Yeah, it's
Okay, cool.
easier to see.
Yeah, so I was leading the music for a church in Grove, and we found this property out there.
I'm going to turn on the backlight just for the video camera.
Cool.
Is it too much?
I pick black.
Good luck, video camera.
What they got
you're
for me,
filming.
B-roll all right. Okay. So this was the farm that we started in 2019, and this was a picture I took, before and after picture I took of the garden plot that we tilled up. This was about 1/2 of an acre of intensive vegetable production using minimal raised beds. There you can kind of see the mounds. And it was a wild ride for us, I will say. So I said we moved out there in 2019, obviously 2020 COVID hits, and so our first real season growing out there was 2020. We were getting things off the ground in 2019 and did a little bit of market sales, but 2020 was really our first year in earnest. So there's my wife and I, it's Maggie, wearing our vegetable masks at the market. And what else happened that year? Oh yeah, we had a storm roll through a few months after we moved in. So that's our house and our cars, which that's an elm tree right there, probably 100-plus-year-old elm tree. Didn't hit the house, didn't hit our cars. We were super grateful. But that was one of 24 trees that came down in the storm with 100-mile-an-hour straight line winds. So that was fun. And then there was one other thing that happened. Yes, I severed my tendon. I severed a tendon in my hand, being stupid with a box knife. And so that was me with my cast on there healing, harvesting some radishes. So it was a rocky start for us for sure, getting out there. But we had a really good year. This was our first year. We ended up pivoting to the farmers market here in Tulsa had a delayed opening because of everything that was going on with COVID. And so we ended up doing some home delivery type sales in Grove, doing online sales. We would have people come out to the farm and we'd deliver it to their house. Then when the market in Tulsa opened back up, we were doing that too. So
We're just curious.
all right. I mean, yeah, I was blown away by those carrots in particular, just because if you try growing carrots in Oklahoma, they're often short and stubby just because it's clay or it's rocks or something. But if you get the right amount of tilth in your soil, if you work the beds down, then you can get a decent carrot. So there's our first market, I think, for the season. My wife running the booth, and I'll pause here and say that the reason we named our farm Thorntree Farm, this is just sort of a little point of interest I like to share. So my last name in French actually means hawthorn tree, or thorn tree, Lepine. In French means thorn tree, and one of the things that happened when we were looking at this property was I was out there one day getting a water sample because it was well water and I wanted to get the water tested. And I was out there with a bucket at a yard hydrant, filling up this bucket with water, and I was kind of not really sure what we were doing. I was like, I don't know about this. And then I looked up and I was like, I'm standing in this grove of trees and I never really paid attention to them. And I looked up and I realized that they were all thorn trees. They were black locust trees, which if you're familiar with black locust trees, they can kind of be a pain. They're small thorns. but they're beautiful trees. They have these nice white blooms in the spring. But that was like, it felt very silly. I was self-conscious at the moment because I was like, is this a sign? You know, like I've been doing this research on my last name, and I kind of just come to this realization that it meant Thorntree, and I was like, is this the place where we're supposed to be? And so we named it that in honor of that, but also, and I'll get into this later, but I see a lot of kind of symbolic significance in thorn trees, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But
It's definitely a sign.
you think so? Yeah.
I do.
So just some more shots of the farm. Did a lot of lettuce. If you're at all familiar with the market gardening world, this is very kind of classic style of doing things. 30-inch beds. A lot of landscape fabric. These are our what's called a caterpillar tunnel. So they're about 14 feet wide, about 10 feet tall. I hadn't put the plastic on them yet, but these are basically unheated greenhouses, so they just give you a little extra growing time in the spring, help you get an earlier start, and go a little longer into the fall. And if with certain crops, you can grow year-round in them, but they also are nice because they keep the rain off your tomatoes. Tomatoes are very sensitive to rain. They can split or burst or just lose their taste if they get a heavy rain right before harvest. So just gives you a little bit more control over what you're growing. And they're pretty cheap and easy to put up quickly. So there's my wife holding a long worm that we found, which we took as evidence for our good soil practices. We're doing something right, you know, because it's like a
The buddies game.
10-inch long worm, yeah. And that was our, you know, we took our kind of soil stewardship very seriously. Aside from that initial groundbreaking to get the garden going, we were doing a no-till system from year to year where you might go in with like a broad fork or something to work the soil deep, but you don't actually disturb the top inches of soil. You leave it together so that you're not breaking up the fungal networks. Yes, ma'am.
Do you think was it more of a clay soil, or was it sandy or rocky? What did you get?
Yeah.
It looked really clay.
It wasn't super bad clay. Grove is interesting because you're kind of getting into the Ozarks in Grove.
Mm-hmm.
And so in general, you'll have a lot of kind of like rocky and hilly areas. The place that we were on though was pretty flat, and it was pasture land. And so the soil was pretty decent. It was like a kind of a silt loam. We did have, I didn't put any pictures in there, but we did have like some kind of like vein of huge rocks that ran through like one section of the garden. It was very bizarre. Like the rest of the garden was fine, and then there was just this one area where there's like huge, big rocks that I was pulling out of there. So I don't know. I'm not a geologist, but I don't know what was going on there. But yeah, it was nice soil. I was impressed for the area. I didn't expect to have that nice of a soil.
Did you do amendments?
I did, yeah. I limed. The soil was a little acid, so I added some lime, and then I was getting really nerdy into like soil chemistry at the time, and so I did a bunch of other stuff too, like micronutrients, copper and zinc, and I don't remember what all else, but yeah, I had some kind of a custom mix that I blended together. Yeah, I was getting real into the soil chemistry. I was also expanding my interests. You know, for somebody who didn't grow up in ag and didn't really grow up around this stuff at all, vegetables seemed like a really approachable way to get into it. Livestock can be kind of intimidating if you're not used to them, if you didn't grow up around it. And so that was kind of my initial connection point into agriculture. But the more I got into it, I began to be more curious about sort of larger scale systems to have a bigger impact on landscapes, a bigger impact. So some books I read around this time that were helping me, I think we talked about this one 2 weeks ago. I think James mentioned this, Mark Shepard's Restoration Agriculture. Really interesting and inspiring book where he talks about how to mimic the oak savanna ecosystem. If you've ever heard that term, it's if we think about the United States, big picture, you've got kind of the dry western half of the United States, and you've got the humid eastern half of the United States. At that transition point, splitting the country in half, you've got this kind of savanna ecotype where it's wet enough to grow trees, but you'll have these open pasture areas as well. And so it's just this kind of like beautiful park-like environment. And so he, on his farm in Wisconsin, is trying to basically mimic that ecosystem. And instead of planting oaks, which would be the typical tree that you'd find in that savanna, he's planting trees that actually produce fruit and nut crops. So he does a lot with chestnuts and hazelnuts, as well as fruit trees. And he's trying to explore how high-calorie nuts like chestnuts and hazelnuts, which are native here and can grow really well here, how those can be kind of caloric replacements for grains, which are very energy intensive to grow, because you got to tell the land to do it and to digest. Yeah, that's right. So in a similar vein, this book, Tree Crops, this is like 100 years old actually, J. Russell Smith.
I've never seen that cover to that book before.
It's a new edition. Yeah, it's super cool. I think he worked for the USDA, and it came out in 1929. And this is sort of the previous book that Mark Shepard read and got inspired by. So permanent agriculture. That's, I can't remember if we talked about this term permaculture, but that's what it's short for, is a permanent agriculture. With the idea being, how can we work more perennials into our system so that we're not having to constantly till and turn over the soil. Problem with that being that you lose carbon into the atmosphere when you do that, and you also can harm your microbiological life in your soil. And then another good book here, Independent Farmstead and Silvopasture. The word silvopasture just means pasture with trees in it. So similar kind of idea here to that savanna ecosystem that we're talking about. Looking at the role that trees can play in our agricultural systems, especially with livestock. And actually one of the trees that he profiles in that book, in Silvopasture, is the black locust tree. And so I'll get into this a little bit. The black locust tree, part of why I like the symbolism of the thorn tree is that it's easy as a farmer, if you see a thorn tree growing on your property, to view it merely as a nuisance. But what I thought was so cool about what this guy was doing with thorn trees was that he was incorporating them into his system using their strength. So a black locust tree is actually it's a legume, so it fixes nitrogen, which is a net benefit for your soil. It's got these beautiful white blossoms that are great for bees, and it's super fast growing, like one of the fast growing trees that you can get. And so he was using them for shade trees in his pasture, and that pile of logs there is probably black locust. I can't say that for sure, but great firewood tree because of how fast growing it is. Fixes nitrogen. And provides quick shade for livestock, which especially for us in Oklahoma is a really big deal. Cattle perform a lot better in the shade than they do in the heat, right? It makes a big difference in their weight gain and helps them be much more efficient.
It used to be the first thing they did what farmers would do was cut down all get rid of the tree.
Right.
Clear the decks.
Exactly. Yeah. Get yourself a blank slate to work with. And so it's sort of a symbol for two different mindsets of looking at the land. One says, how can I basically control this as much as possible, start with a blank slate, and only have growing what I want to be growing, versus looking at what is already there, what kind of wants to grow there, what's native to that area, and saying, how can I work with this? How can I incorporate this into my system? Similar species as Osage orange. I'm sure we're all familiar with Osage orange, the big green brain looking fruits. That was what they used for barbed wire before they had
Is that
barbed wire.
nitrogen fixer as well?
It's not, no.
You know, you can really huff it with someone though, like your brother.
Somebody, yeah, totally.
Which it was for brother baseballs 1 or 2 times a week.
I know plenty of people in the woods that like them also for just sitting on a fence post and shooting at.
I've heard all kinds of stories about what you can do with them.
So the OC charge it's actually like a natural occurring kind of latex.
Yeah.
That's what it's growing out of.
Mhm.
But I don't know of anybody who's like figured out, you know, any kind of like marketable use for like the latex instead of OC George.
Apparently the creatures that ate that fruit are extinct. It was like mastodons ate it or something.
I guess deer still eat them like after they
thought it was
like
a deer repellent.
get soft and weird.
Really?
People
I've heard people say it's a deer repellent.
I've heard people it's weird. And now we want to get some and like put it out.
Yeah, that's one of the hardest trees, like on the density scale. It's like,
Yeah.
Yeah, Bodart.
Yeah, I burned it in my wood stove and you'll
Yeah,
see
they make-
stuff starting to glow red. I mean,
Yeah.
it's
Lots of like Native American craftsmen make bows out of them.
Yeah, bows, yeah. Duck calls.
High tensile strings.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, really, black locust is the same way. It's like, it's up there too as far as the hardness scale. And it burns super hot and it's super rot resistant. They'll use it for fence posts. It's kind of interesting. It seems like all the trees that have thorns are like super rot resistant and super dense and hard.
Interesting.
Have you guys seen black locust? They got little clumps of, I was looking at them, I never,
I know, I thought of that.
I've never heard the word, so it's like, got
Yeah.
lots of, I haven't seen them in Oklahoma, the native to North Carolina.
Mhm.
There's lots of clumps, these like pretty flowers, but they're big clumps.
Beautiful white flowers. Yeah, they smell great in spring.
And I was like, I'm gonna miss this tree. I've never seen one in Oklahoma.
Are they often mistaken for dogwoods?
No,
I don't know. It's probably, I could see that.
There's a picture.
But the bloom's pretty distinctive. It's more of a, yeah, it's a pretty different kind of bloom.
Yeah.
I don't think squirrels would even like them.
There's also honey locust trees, which have a much bigger thorn. But they produce these edible bean pods that are super high in sugar that cattle can graze on. And there was some breeding work done probably 100 years ago for thornless varieties that they had cultivated. And yeah, so anyway, there's a bunch I could say about thorn trees. I've thought a lot about thorn trees. And I'm sure we'll get into kind of the religious symbolic significance of thorn trees as well. But the payout of some of my reading during this time was, as much as I loved growing vegetables, but I was also finding myself hungry to be involved with something on a larger scale. And I loved what I was doing, but I was starting to think in terms not of like the half acre, but of hundreds of acres, wanting to see these principles be put into practice at a large scale. And so about that time, I got an opportunity to go work for a startup company called Cook's Venture
I can smell this picture.
in Northwest Arkansas. Yes, who has been near a chicken house. We don't have a ton of them over here.
Oh,
Okay, down 412.
412, yeah, I mean, getting towards,
well, I mean, toward Arkansas,
Still no.
along the river.
yeah. Has anybody heard of Cook's Venture? Is that, no? It's be a fun story then. Okay, so here's my chicken farm experience. I worked for Cook's Venture for 2 years. And this is my videos. So they're a free range chicken company. So they were taking these old chicken barns and cutting doors in the side so that they could let the birds out every day. This is their proprietary breed of chicken. If you're at all familiar with the chicken industry, you know that the Cornish cross is the big breed that people raise. It's extremely fast growing. You can get it to butchering size in 40 days, 45 days. So this is their proprietary breed called the Pioneer. You can see all the color variation. Some of the birds are naked neck birds that don't have any feathers on their necks. There's white, there's brown birds. So this bird is what's called a slow growth chicken. Some people think that the Cornish cross bird is inherently inhumane because of how fast it grows. And the reason for that is that, yeah, I know, this is a much nicer video, I'll show you in a second. The people say that the Cornish cross grows so fast that its body can't really keep up with how much fat it's putting on, and so sometimes the birds will die prematurely just from like organ failure, or they'll get so fat that like their legs break because they can't move around. And so some people say, like, in addition to the quality of the barns being a problem, just the breed itself is inhumane. And so there's been a push to develop slow growth breeds that take, instead of taking 45 days to get to market weight, they do it in 65 days or 70 days, which seems like a small difference, but it gives the birds more time to develop.
What quality of meat would that be though, to have an exaggerated growth? I mean,
Well, it's superior because you get more time for flavor to develop. That's the other thing that people say about Cornish cross is that like so much of the weight is water weight, and so it like doesn't taste like anything, and sometimes you'll run into issues like woody breast or like streaking. There's these particular issues that they'll run into at the butcher counter with Cornish cross birds. So they were selling these birds as being both more humane and also superior cooking quality, better taste. They taste like chickens used to taste, but
So how long did it take these to grow up?
about 70 days.
Okay.
Yeah, about 70 days. It was called the Pioneer. Yeah.
I was thinking of the Cornish cross, or the 40-day bird. That one looks like what I was
all
going to
the
the
basics.
house and wish
It's not rocket science, we're just trying to do something better.
Warnings when we open up the doors, don't pour out and run to the trays. As you say, if you pan around, there are no fences.
Most chicken in America, even organic,
Would be so much
doesn't have the ability to go outside. Just access to sunlight and fresh air and grass. It really cultivates a healthier animal.
This is definitely not a typical chicken farm. They can eat off the new grasses every day. They have access to the sunshine and all of the insects, all of the biodiversity that you can see from the soils and different type of grasses.
Raising the chickens this way produces a better product. I believe that the kind of care that we put into this operation, I believe these birds respond to it. They actually like seeing us. I mean, they know that we're here to take care of them, and we're happy to do that.
When you have a bird that's going outside, the birds start to exhibit their natural behavior. The welfare of the animal is directly correlated to the quality of food that we're producing.
So how do they get them all back in?
What is going in?
Say that again.
They don't want the chickens to go in.
They're mad if you don't have the.
They naturally want to go back in typically.
Yeah.
When it gets dark, yeah, because they're scared of predators.
This, would you call this genetically modified?
No, it was just a cross between 3 different like heirloom varieties of bird. It was like I want to say it was a Delaware and a Rhode Island Red or something. So it wouldn't be considered genetically modified. It was a traditional breeding operation.
Can people buy these as chicks and raise them themselves? Or is it just
No.
No.
Yeah, we never got there with the operation. I think there was maybe plans to do that at some point, but no, at this point, you cannot buy the genetics, unfortunately.
That is not a good capacity.
It's all in the basics. It's not rocket science.
Well, so that's another reason why there's a lot of people, especially in the homestead community, getting away from the broilers is because, or the
Cornish cross.
Cornish cross is because it's all owned by Tyson.
Right.
So they bought that patent back in the 50s. They had this competition that went through and paid this guy like $500 or whatever. And it was like, hey, bring us your breeds.
Yeah.
What are the pros and cons? And that's when they bought the Cornish cross breed, genetics. And the big thing is, just how kind of, I mean, we raised some. We just got done raising some, and it's like, man, this is just a sad existence. Yeah, they're great. Like they were on grass, they were all these things, but it's like,
They hardly move.
yeah, once they get to that point, you're like, all right, I don't want to do this anymore. But we're already here, and I like chicken, so.
Right.
But it is having something, not the long, my 6-7 month long growth process before butchering is a nice.
Totally.
That can still free range like they used to, which is
the
which would be
one
beneficial.
The one that I hear people talk about is the Freedom Ranger breed.
Yeah.
It's pretty readily available. I think it's a similar. It maybe takes 80 days to maturity. But we actually raised Freedom Rangers at this farm when our hatchery couldn't keep up. And yeah, they're good birds. I mean, they're super fast. They run around like crazy. They're nothing like the Cornish cross.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna play this video, but part of what attracted me to this company is they actually brought in Mark Shepard, who wrote the book Restoration Agriculture that we were talking about, to plant 20,000 trees on their partner farms. So in addition to their kind of home-based farm that the company owned, they had about 25 partner farms in the network in that area that were contracted to raise their bird. And so they brought in Mark Shepard, made this plan, and planted 20,000 hazelnut trees across 16 different farms.
Cool.
Which, I was all over. That was like exactly the kind of thing that I was interested in at the time and was trying to learn more about. And it's a fun video. It's about 5 minutes if you want to go watch it. I'll skip it now for time, but
I believe personally missing.
try to skip it. So there's me planting an apple tree on the farm and planting some herbs. And this was just kind of an interesting little time lapse here. So this is one of the chicken barns at the property. Yeah, exactly. So this is April. This is the same house in November. So you can see the impact that chicken can have on the landscape. And if you've ever raised chickens, you know that too. Just how much they scratch and how much they can, make a pasture look like the moon. So
then do they reseed that?
that was what we were doing. So this was very interesting for me. I was kind of learning as I went, just about the ecological benefits of kind of what we were doing and whether it was legitimate and what to think about all of this. So here's the same barn. This is in November. We went through and we spread seed and then put down hay as a mulch over the seed. And about a month later, we've got greenery coming back up again. So that was the vision for what they were doing was, yes, the chickens are going to cause some damage to the landscape outside the barns, but as long as each farmer is going through after the flock and reseeding the pasture, then it should be fine. That was the idea.
This was at Cook's.
At Cook's Venture. This was at their company show farm, which is where I worked for the first year that I was with them. The second year that I worked for them, I branched out and started to go visit some of the partner farms in the network. And I also, before I did that, this was just kind of fun. We planted a bunch of herbs, did a huge herb garden, because they like to hang these herb bundles in the house for the chickens to peck at. It's just kind of a little weird thing that they like to do. And so we thought, let's grow our own herbs. So this was a fun project for me. At a big scale here, we did, this is how we got established. Gave them a fighting chance with the black plastic, and then after about a season, we ripped that out and put in mulch. So there's oregano and thyme. And we did about 2 acres in total of herb gardens. Wow. That was a fun project. Anyway, then the story continues. I got involved with a different department, and I started going to the partner farms and servicing them, inspecting them. And I began to realize what the actual situation was in the company. I'd been on the company show farm where everything is kind of kept manicured and glamorous for the video shoots and for the customers and the investors. And then I saw what the bulk of the chicken that we were raising actually looked like, and it was disillusioning, to say the least. So this is one of the company show farms, or contract farms. There's supposed to be windows here. There's supposed to be natural sunlight. There's not. There's supposed to be outdoor access. There's not. The idea was that they were, these farmers were in transition and we're getting them there, but it's a process. But this basically looks identical to a conventional farm. And so the last year that I was working for them, I wasn't completely rosy-eyed about the company because I had seen a lot of the dysfunction among the executives. The culture was not great, high turnover, people were leaving left and right and getting burned out. So I had a lot of questions about the company, but when I started to see what was really going on, that was sort of the straw that broke the camel's back. Anyway, this is actually not anything bad. This is a picture from the hatchery. I just thought it was fun to put it in. I got to work in the hatchery for a little bit. Kind of interesting to see the crazy huge scale. So I didn't mention numbers earlier, but to give you some perspective, these barns would hold anywhere from 10,000 to 16,000 birds at a time. And a farmer might have 4 barns, they might have 6 or 8 barns, it kind of just depends on the property, but at any given time, a farmer might have upwards of 100,000 birds on his property for 70 days, from hatching until they were caught for slaughter. So, and here's a picture of the plant, because I went to the plant one day, and I'm glad I didn't have to go back any other days. But there are the chickens, freshly decapitated, in the river of blood. And it's just as horrific as you would think. But I think this is kind of just all chicken plants. I don't think Cook's was like worse than others or bad or anything. It's just an unpleasant environment to be in, obviously. I don't think there was anything nefarious going on or inhumane. I think they were doing the best they could. It's just obviously an unpleasant environment.
I can smell that picture too.
What's that? You can smell it? Yeah. Yep, there's the assembly line and the steam, and it's hot, it's crazy. Crazy place to be in. Cool, so that's kind of the end of my story. I'll wrap it up by saying the company went bankrupt about 6 months after I left. We moved back to Tulsa last year, mainly to be closer to family, and the company completely fell apart. They brought on a new CEO for like the last couple of months, and he wasn't able to fix it, and then they went bankrupt and fired all their employees. So that's why you can't buy the Pioneer if you ever could have. So it was a really interesting experience for me. It made me very suspicious of labels, I will say, because I feel like I've seen kind of I saw the certifications that we were approved for, and I knew what was actually going on. And that was an important takeaway, and also, I lost my train of thought. It was a disheartening experience, but very informative and very interesting. And I liked the vision, and I think that was what was most disappointed about it, was that it was a good idea, and it could have worked. I think there was a market for it. I think it was a good idea, and it was sort of just a failure of leadership and company culture in some ways. It didn't need to fail, I think. So I do want to turn a little bit in our last just like 10 minutes together, because I want to stop for any discussion and questions, to kind of my personal journey with thinking through issues of faith, agriculture, the environment. And to frame that discussion, often if you get into this conversation at all, you'll often hear people reference this paper by Lynn White from 1966 called The Historical Roots of Our Ecological Crisis. Lynn White was a history professor at UCLA and wrote this famous paper basically saying like, hey, the ecological crisis is Christianity's fault because the Bible asserts man's dominion over nature and establishes a trend of anthropocentrism, and Christianity teaches that we're made in the image of God, and so it puts up this kind of barrier between us and the rest of the created world. And I like this as a frame for our discussion because I think it's a charge that you might hear people bring against our Christian faith. And I think it's interesting to think about what our response is as Christians to that kind of attack. And there's another thing I would add on to Lynn's analysis here, which is that certain eschatological traditions within the Christian faith might lend itself to this attack more. So, certain like premillennial dispensationalist thinking is going to de-emphasize the importance of the physical world. And I'm going to get into that here with a clip of John MacArthur, a famous pastor in America. And I don't play this to like dunk on him or dunk on him or anything. I just think it's interesting the way he is thinking about it and talking about it. So don't see me as wanting to get cheap points in or anything. But I will say he takes a rather smug and condescending tone in his talk, and so it can be a little irritating if you're somebody who does care about these issues, to hear how kind of blasé he is being about things that people care about. But I'm going to play this, and then I'm going to play a contrasting viewpoint just to help kind of set up this conversation.
Several hundred evangelical leaders, you might have seen it, college presidents, seminary presidents.
So he's talking sort of sarcastically about evangelicals who are concerned about the climate.
Pastors, teachers, they issued a call to care for the planet, to heal the damaged fabric of the creation, to work for the healing of the earth. Now the focus goes from that rather grandiose thing, and I've seen some of their yards, and they're not even doing it in their own neighborhood, but anyway. But it goes from that very grandiose thing to, we must focus on stopping global warming, or the polar caps are going to melt and we're all going to drown. And I just want to say, have you ever seen a rainbow? Because every time there appears a rainbow, this is the promise of God that He will never again destroy the earth by water. Relax.
Well, he's right, because we're in droughts.
Right? Yeah. Okay, so there's one little bit. I'll play one more little bit.
By the way, if you're going to vote for something, vote for warming. Less deaths due to cold, regions more habitable, larger crops, longer growing season. That's good. Warming helps the poor. Cutting energy harms the poor who need energy desperately. Don't call yourself a Christian and try to shut down the very energy that's in this earth, this disposable planet, to be used. If you're going to be a Christian, then use the power, the energy that we have to help the people who so desperately need it. There are 2 billion people on our planet with no electricity. I think it's going to help them to shut down advancement. They suffer, and they are less susceptible to every natural disaster. Poor suffer the most. I mean, we see that in a microcosm. It's always the people in the trailer park, isn't it, that go down in the hurricane. It's the most unprotected people. The world needs more energy. Lowering energy is deadly, and it's not legitimate, it's not scientific. So, step on the grass, kill a deer, drill for oil now.
Okay, very interesting. Is John MacArthur susceptible to Lynn White's charge against the Christian faith? We could discuss that.
Several.
In some ways, I think what John MacArthur is doing is sort of recycling. Maybe you might be familiar with these books that have come out recently in the last couple of years. People skeptical of the environmental movement for perhaps legitimate reasons. So in some ways, what I hear him saying is a version of what other people have said, journalists, scientists. Okay, that's one piece. This is Douglas Moo, who is a fellow evangelical teacher. He's written a book called Creation Care, Biblical Theology for Life, that I commend to you. It's a good book. I'm going to play a little clip of him talking. But basically, I mean, Doug Moo and John MacArthur have a lot of common ground theologically. You know, they would be from the same basic camp of conservative, evangelical, Baptist kind of people. And as you'll hear, they have, you know, drastically different approaches to this issue.
Studied in space. Here's an estimate of what's going to happen in Bangladesh if the climate continues to change and the oceans continue to rise as people now predict it will. 15 million people affected, losing their land, not able to grow crops on it any longer, not able to live on it any longer in many cases. 15 million people affected. Well, you know, things like this are going to affect cities like Miami as well. What's the difference? Look at the comparison of the GDP. Miami can afford to build seawalls, to elevate their highways, as they're already doing because the effects of the rising sea are being felt in Miami and other coastal areas. They can afford to do that. Look at their GDP. Look at the GDP of people in Bangladesh. Can't afford to do these kinds of things. At a certain point, again, creation care is simply a species of biblical social justice. Here's a map that kind of reminds us of this. As climate change takes place, the countries who have produced the most greenhouse gases are going to be perhaps the least affected. Countries that do not produce nearly as much greenhouse gas over time because they've not been industrialized are going to feel the real brunt of climate change. So, a very simple way, what does it mean for me to love the other? What does it mean to love my brother and sister? Not people who live next door to me, but as Jesus reminded us in the parable of the Good Samaritan, that love needs to extend beyond the usual boundaries we might set for it as we look at people at different parts of the world being adversely affected by climate change.
Okay, so interesting that they're both speakers are concerned about the poor, and they have completely different solutions for what to do. One guy is saying, because climate change is going to affect the poor more, we need to do X and Y and Z. And John MacArthur is saying, because the poor are being affected, we actually need to increase our energy usage and bolster them up. Again, similar concerns, similar theological background, completely different approaches.
Extended.
This is a very short clip.
The simplest way to present a mandate for creation care for those of us who claim to be followers of Jesus is simply to be reminded of the two great love commandments. Love God by faithfully stewarding His creation. Love others, our neighbors, by providing a healthy and sustainable environment for them to inhabit.
So Moo grounds his, as he says, creation care is simply a species of biblical social justice. And he grounds the creation care mandate just in the two great commandments. If we love God, we will take care of His creation. And if we love others, we will, as Wendell Berry says, we will not despise the great inheritance on which their life depends. So I didn't mention this, but Lynn White in his paper actually suggested St. Francis of Assisi as a sort of model for Christianity to return to say, St. Francis had this right perspective on the human's relationship with the natural world, if we could just get back to him. And so I'm saying Douglas Moo kind of agrees with Littlebury, who kind of agrees with St. Francis of Assisi with this quote: all creatures are parts of a whole upon which each is dependent, and it is a contradiction to love your neighbor and despise the great inheritance on which his life depends. So emphasizing our interconnectivity and the ecological foundation of human sustenance and life. Got about 5 more minutes here. N.T. Wright, another biblical scholar, like how this quote interacts with John MacArthur. He says, "It is striking how the earliest Christians clung to the twin doctrines of creation and judgment. God made the world and made it good, and one day he will come and sort it all out. Take away the goodness of creation and you have a judgment where the world is thrown away as so much garbage. Like John MacArthur said, it's a disposable planet." I thought that was a really interesting phrase from him. He used it twice in that talk. Do we think our planet is disposable? "Leaving us sitting on a disembodied cloud playing disembodied harps. Take away judgment, and you have this world rumbling on with no hope except the pantheist one of endless cycles of being and history. Put creation and judgment together, and you get new heavens and new earth, created not ex nihilo, but ex vetere, not out of nothing, but out of the old one, the existing one. And the model for that is, of course, the resurrection of Jesus, who didn't leave his body behind in the tomb and grow a new one, but whose body, dead and buried, was raised to life 3 days later and recognized by the marks left by the nails in the spear. There is a whole world of eschatological understanding in the resurrection narratives, not least John's insistence that Easter Day is the first day of the week. John, so rooted in creational theology, knows exactly what he is doing. Easter is the beginning of God's new creation. We don't have to wait. It has already burst in, and the whole point of John 20 and 21 is that we who believe in Jesus are to become, in the power of his Spirit, not only beneficiaries of that new creation, but also agents of that new creation." Love how this responds to John MacArthur. I also had to put in a John Calvin quote, basically saying the same thing, because you're Presbyterians, we're Presbyterians. He says, "Of the elements of the world, I shall say only one thing, that they are to be consumed, only that they may be renovated. Their substance still remaining the same, as it may be easily gathered," from Romans 8:21 and other passages. So, do we think our planet is disposable? Or do we agree with Calvin and Wright that something, in fact, more mysterious and beautiful is going on in the resurrection and in the new creation?
Is that rhetorical?
It's rhetorical. Yeah, it's rhetorical. Yeah. But feel free to answer it if you want to weigh in.
Well, I think so. Kind of in my, so I see this a lot in a lot of things, like in the Christian life. Is there's a very heavy dependence on God's sovereignty, right? So it's like, oh well, God controls everything. God made everything. The world, the earth will just heal itself, right? We see, the ozone was falling apart in the 90s. Now all of a sudden it's starting to fix itself.
Totally.
Well, is it because of God's sovereignty, or is it because of attention to these things, right? So, but I think there's so many people like, the people we talked about MacArthur, and it's like they're leaning way hard on God's sovereignty. So, the earth means it's ours. We can do whatever we want with it. But it totally takes out the whole opposite side of that, where it's, well, there's also personal responsibility to that, right? Subdue the earth also means we have to take care of it, because it's not just my lifetime that this earth's going to be around. That's extremely selfish thinking, right? But that's what that thought process is. It's like, hey, use it up, whatever. In 20 years, I'm not going to be here, right? Or whatever the case may be. It's like, well, that's not being a good steward of the things that we're giving and having that responsibility, But then we also kind of see the too much personal responsibility with like the new a lot of the newer churches, where it's like, oh well, it's almost like DIY Christianity, right? Where it's like taking almost God's sovereignty out of it all. It's like, oh well, we can speak this into existence and make these things happen. So it's that balance where, and I think that's where that is, there's just a big imbalance to the God sovereignty side of things.
Yeah, it's good. It's hard.
God will rule and we will rule each of our lives. So I'm not sure how much we really do have to say about it.
I had this radical idea. I listened to a guy named Francis Chin, and John MacArthur is like John Knox to the Presbyterians, and John MacArthur's like that for the Baptists.
Yeah,
Came to show them the way of Reformation.
yeah.
So I'll just preface that because that's how.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Same here. Yeah. Same.
It seems to me that one of the amazing things is that a place where you can be so theologically grounded is like in your rows with your lettuce. That's like because
reality.
Because you've got your work to do, and you can't make anything grow.
Totally. Yeah.
Right. You have your work to do, and you can't make anything grow. And here you have like human agency and the sovereignty of God.
Picture perfect.
Picture perfect. In your rows of lettuce, right? And so, as we're sitting down that conversation, I'm just like, if John MacArthur would just keep a garden, it would sort a lot of things out for him. Right? I'm like, what's your yard like, John? And you just put up
Pray about it.
Put up a little 6x8 greenhouse and try to grow something, and it'll teach you a lot about the kingdom of God.
Well, and so ground you in the present, which is what Wendell Berry talks about. We didn't get to it, but so much of this talk about the environment or climate change or whatever can lead to a sort of unproductive focus on the future, a sense of despair, fear, anxiety, and where it just becomes impossible to do anything. And so Wendell Berry's focus is like love a particular place, stay in the present, and that is what's going to keep you grounded in hope, actually. Let me just read one more, and then we'll have like 2 minutes for questions. We'll close this out. Walter Brueggemann on Psalm 8. It is not naive to say that the first step in addressing the environmental crisis is to praise God. For praising God is that act of worship and mode of existence that reminds us that we human beings are not free to do whatever our science and technology enable us to do. Praise flies in the face of our culture's tendency to unrestrained exploitation. I thought that was nice. Anyway, thank you all for your attention. I'd be glad for any more discussion or Q&A or whatever.
Thank you, David.
Yeah.
Thank you. I truly believe though it's like an overcomplicated problem. If you're going out as a farmer, you live as a farmer. If everybody took care of their property as a farmer, literally like soil testing, grass testing, that sort of thing, and realized that before you know it, hey, my neighbor's a beef farmer, but I have goats and hogs and chickens. I need a beef. And go to your neighbor and you say, hey, I'll work all these cows and I'll keep them fed and I'll keep them watered in their spots, but all I need is a beef. Okay. So then they would come and say, well, hey, I don't keep chickens, they're gross. And then I'd be like, hey, I keep you an eggs. And then, it gets around. Farmers take care of each other because, the little acres turn into big barters. And that's it. So it's like we get this idea of like take the cash out, take the profit out, and just take care of each other. And then, like I said, we get all we scientifically get all we can do with our land with rotating what crops and cows and what's eating our land and what's perfect for garden now, and But it's not really about like take care of me. It's like take care of each other.
Yeah, and there's definitely been a transition. America was the idea of America, and especially in like the the time of the Industrial Revolution and things. It was all about, and even America in general. The beginning of America was individualism, right? You can come to America. You can praise how you want to praise, right? It's not just the Church of England anymore, right? There's very much individualistic. Well, what happened is that transformed through the years to that individualism became, I'm just looking out for number one, right? I am my own individual, so it's like whatever benefits me, and that's what's going on. But you see in the last 20 years more of a shift which is why you're seeing this huge boom right now in homesteading and CSAs and bartering systems and farmers markets and all these things that, 20 years ago people would call it, kind of hippy dippy, right? It's like, but now it's getting much larger because we understand more and more that it takes a village to make things happen. You can't do everything on your own, and I think that's it's a good shift. I think it's being more beneficial to a lot of people.
Yeah.
Thank you all for your presence and your attention and your prayer. Well, next week, we'll have the joy of welcoming Aaron Martin from Fresh RX. It's going to be our speaker. So if you get a chance, you can just do a little Google search and learn a little bit about Fresh RX before you get here. Fresh RX. Okay. Fresh RX. And so it's pretty impressive. Aaron's really just a compelling figure. You'll love Aaron. And enjoyed her talk so much. So please come and bring a friend if you can. It's going to be good. Thank you all.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.